I'm Chris Costantino, and this is Beyond the Finish Line. Beyond the Finish Line is a podcast dedicated to digging into the minds of the influencers, thought leaders, and market disruptors responsible for shaping frictionless interaction and digital transformation in a modernized enterprise. We will discover what motivates them, break down their journey and experiences, and identify where they feel the industry is going. Each session lets listeners hear firsthand what works when implementing strategy, technology, and change through the transformation lifecycle. Hey, Chris. Today we're here with Chris Hatter with Nielsen Media. Chris, how you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Thanks for joining. So, Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself. Your role, the organization, things that you guys are doing right now.
Sure. So I'm currently the Chief Information Security Officer for Nielsen globally. I've been with Nielsen for, I guess, I'm losing track at this point, probably 11 years now. I got my first gig at Nielsen when I was a junior at the University of South Florida. So I got an internship when I was in the technology program there at USF, and I've been working with Nielsen ever since. So in terms of what I do now, like I said, global CISO. The company operates in about 110 countries around the world. We have two major business units that do similar but different things. First and foremost, I think what we're most well known for is our media business unit, where we measure what people consume on media devices, whether it's TV, online and mobile phones, over-the-top devices like a Roku player, Netflix, Hulu, etc. And then the other side of the business is measuring what people buy or consume. And our big clients there are major consumer packaged goods manufacturers, retailers, clients like Coke, Pepsi, Kraft, Walmart, etc. So those are the two big business units, and we do market research associated with both of those industries.
So a fun, sprawling organization.
It's definitely massive.
Definitely a fun time. So talk to us a little bit. Like when we look at your profile, it's a really interesting profile. You've come up the ranks. You might not think it, but rather quickly. And knowing, I've been in the Tampa Bay area for a long time, servicing Nielsen in a lot of different manners. From staffing to solutions and things like that. So we've seen a lot of evolution there, and I'm sure you've seen a lot yourself. And now you're sitting in a much more of a leadership seat there. So, can you walk us through, like what's that evolution look like for you and coming into where you were to the age of where you're at now?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I feel like I've slammed 30 years into this 10 or 11. I've had and worked for several different CEOs, and it's always felt like almost a very different organization or a very different time in Nielsen's, trajectory. Like I said, I started as an intern, and actually I've done a lot of different roles within the technology space and the operations space at Nielsen. But what really kind of sparked my interest in the domain I work in now is I was in high school. I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do or what I wanted to work on. I was always technical, whether it was playing video games, installing different programs, building computers, you name it. I always had my hands on technology, and that turned into being kind of the resident IT expert within my at my family's house. And my dad one time told me, he said, "Hey, you should really think about doing cybersecurity, right? And it's going to be a field that in the future, might not be super hot right now, but it's going to explode in the future." So I said, "Okay, whatever, Dad. Thanks for the advice." And I just moved along with my my day-to-day life. And I tried to. There wasn't really like cybersecurity degree programs, and so I did technology. I took as many courses that were kind of relevant to cybersecurity at the time. And when I came out and started to work at Nielsen, there was some really phenomenal technology leaders who I told that I'm interested in security and cybersecurity. And from the time that I was an intern through my first 2 years where I was in a management development program at Nielsen, I always was able to stay close to at least some element of cybersecurity, whether it was working on installing better patching processes or supporting an incident or just kind of peripherally working with the IT folks who would work on cybersecurity and the actual global security team that we had. So I just stayed close to it. And like I said, I went through a management development program for 2 years.
Sure.
That took me through a series of four approximately 6 month rotations where I was able to go around Nielsen and spend a little bit of time doing different roles. Um, all under the technology umbrella. So I started in software testing as my first rotation. The second one was actually managing a team of people and contractors through a couple different release cycles on some of our more sensitive systems. And then I had this really interesting opportunity that you don't find very often, but Nielsen relocated me to New York, and I was able to work in our client services group. So I was supporting CBS, the broadcast network, their research department, totally out of technology, just getting a really clear understanding of what it's like to kind of be on the other side of the fence of technology and operations and hear directly from our customers what they need and what they want from our organization, which was fascinating. And then my fourth rotation, I moved to France and worked on a project in China, which was all around file transfer. When I came out of that, I went into kind of a more senior program management style role where I was focused on disaster recovery and some other like business continuity aspects. And that's where my career really took a pretty major turn. There was a major breach. This is public knowledge, and there was media about it. There was a major breach shortly after we acquired a company. And at the time, our CIO said, hey, someone's got to go down there and someone's got to go get their arms around this and get a handle on it really quickly, like as soon as we learned of the breach. And so my boss at the time, who's now the CTO over at Iron Mountain, came in and gave me a call one night and said, hey, you need to be on the next plane to Mexico City and basically don't come back until this is fixed. And I did that. The next 8 months of my life was post-breach cybersecurity remediation work on that acquisition. And I had a consultant schedule. I flew to Mexico City Monday, came back Friday night, and just repeated that cycle constantly. I got a tremendous amount of exposure to executives through that process, and I was able to really, kind of plant my flag as someone who's credible within the organization from a cybersecurity standpoint. That's really where the snowball started rolling down the hill, so to speak. That turned into, hey, Chris, why don't you go do some of this audit and assessment work in other parts of the world? And so I started basically traveling the globe and doing that. That turned itself into Chris plus a contractor, Chris plus two contractors, to Chris with a team, and kind of the rest is history.
Yeah, no, it sounds interesting too, because when you look at that, some of the most successful leaders that I've worked with in my career are those folks that actually had that experience to get out into the field and navigate that. Or if that opportunity wasn't presented to them, it's them kind of going off on their own and interviewing those stakeholders that are out there. But I would imagine that, that experience and exposure that you had both in the field and relating with a customer, understanding what the organization's dealing with, as well as that post-breach scenario, I'm sure there was a lot of things that you were trying to break down around, how did this happen? How do we disallow it to happen again? And then there's obviously some organizational pieces and elements that, you're talking to the folks that are going to play a role in remediation in the future, or that there might be some gaps in either skills or technologies or the way that you're using technology to create that ecosystem for yourself from a security standpoint. So talk to us a little bit about that structure. Right now I'm Chris and I'm in my CISO role, or I'm Chris and I'm developing into that CISO role. How do you take that experience and where did you start looking at the organization and how it needed to be structured as you started to gain traction with contractors and headcount?
Good question. So what I would start with is we had this really interesting and unique opportunity to build a very kind of progressive cybersecurity function at Nielsen. We had cybersecurity even after that breach in pockets of our organization. And so it was about 4 years ago that for the first time we actually brought together all of these resources and really invested in having one cybersecurity team under a CISO umbrella. And so that was a major step that we took 4 years ago, but the fact that we didn't have that allowed us to really think through very modern ways of applying cybersecurity in our very global and hybrid cloud environment. And so, when I first started, it was kind of a team that was kind of pushed together, and we had a kind of a high level strategy around what we really wanted to do. But we had to go from a cyber team that was kind of just pulled together of a bunch of people with a varying professions and varying degrees of cyber skills. The first thing that I did was just take a look at the roster, take a look at the talent, and I wanted to make sure that we brought in some external influence within the team, right? So even myself, I'm very, my experience background is very Nielsen. We definitely want to get some different perspectives from some cyber professionals that have been in different teams that have had a varied kind of view of the world. And we did that. So we reorganized, we restructured into a function that was very keen on making sure that we had the right handoffs around the program, right? So that, when you have a cyber incident, that cyber incident is managed by a particular set of people, then it's passed off for post-breach remediation, which also has a closed loop to make sure our policies are updated. And so we wanted to make sure that we had kind of this well-oiled machine where our teams would work together in collaboration to achieve all the goals that we wanted to do. So skill profile was one, just the makeup in the organization. It's actually pretty traditional that in terms of what the team makeup looks like. We have GRC team, cyber operations, folks who focus on making sure the products that we build are secure, identity access management, et cetera. So it's pretty traditional in that sense, but we are very focused on constantly improving and evolving on how those teams actually work together.
Absolutely. So as you're building that program, right? Because at the end of the day, it sounds like you removed it from really being an IT ops organization that kind of did some security work to having that security analyst view, and then looking at it at a risk level, and so on and so forth. So what did that interaction look like, right? I mean, we work with a lot of the viewers that are going to be listening and viewing this today. Our organization is a much smaller than yours, right? Where there is dissemination of this is IT, and they kind of sat in that old space that but being able to demonstrate to the board, why is this important, and get that funding that you need. Were you forced to go down this quantitative path, or how did you go through that conversation, John?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, first and foremost, what I would say to people listening is that security is not purely an IT function, and that culturally needs to be understood. I think people who look at it solely as a technology function are missing the mark, and ultimately are not going to achieve what they want to achieve. Cybersecurity is a risk management function that happens to have very technical people in it. And so I think trying to make sure that you have executives who have alignment with the statement that I just made, and kind of helping to instill that in the culture, is absolutely paramount. I think a lot of people see this because, or adapt and go down this path because they have an incident, and that typically forces some of this. But I think if you have your most executive leadership aligned to the idea that cybersecurity is a risk management function first and foremost, that has a bunch of technical resources within, that's step one. Step two is then it really needs to be a top-down commitment from your board, from your senior executives, all the way down to the organization, because every single person needs to understand how critical cyber is. It is not, as much as it's a risk management function, it is also a function that everyone plays a role in. I can't tell you how much I value my legal team. I can't tell you how much I value my communications team, the technology teams, everyone, because quite frankly, the cybersecurity program is the culmination of all of those people's work. The cybersecurity team just happens to be steering that ship. So for me, it's culture. Two, it's top-down, leadership that needs to kind of reinforce that message, and ultimately, that's how you start down the path of having a successful cyber function.
So when you get through that, right? So take that one more level down, right? And you start seeing, the way that security is going to interact with these other groups. You've got service delivery, obviously a lot of interaction with those folks from a remediate perspective. You've got the DevOps groups. Were you faced with some resistance there? And as you kind of went through that, how did you ensure that you're able to have that good, strong communication stream?
Yeah, I think the answer is, of course. I mean, there's always this kind of natural tension between cyber and IT, because in the cyber world, we want everything to be secure, but if you take that to an extreme, it's very difficult for the IT people, the developers, the DevOps folks, the operators to actually get the work done. And that's, again, why this has to be a risk management function. You have to find the right risk management balance between the level of security that you're trying to enforce with actually what your objective is, which is typically in a business, you're trying to make money and you're trying to get more clients and you're trying to be productive. And so there's a balance that needs to be struck in doing that. But like I said before, like the culture has to be that security has to come over convenience, and then you strike the balance with what the business priorities are, because that's ultimately why the cybersecurity team even exists. And so if you try to knock down some of those walls with that kind of story, I think it's at least a foot forward in the right direction. I mean, I think too often people in the cybersecurity profession get so enamored by the incredibly technical controls that we could implement, all these amazing tools and AI and machine learning and all this stuff that we could roll out. But you have to do that in coordination with your business leaders, your technology leaders, and you got to do it together, right? And it's got to feel like a team sport. And so, of course, we definitely face some of that tension, but ultimately what we do is we try to make this really team oriented and focused on ultimately achieving business results, which is why we're all employed by the company.
Sure. So one of the things that I naturally really respect out of the path that you kind of talked us through so far is, the starting of the people and the process first, right? And really determining, what is our footprint look like? How do we interact? What's that process going to look like? Having the top-down approach. Then you start kind of getting into the weeds a little bit more, right? Where the processes are driving the need for some advancement in modernized technology, right? How did you go down the path? I mean, you have some really interesting tool selections that you've made as an organization, but how do you come to those decisions at the end of the day? I mean, there's so many tools. I mean, I'm a Channel Alliance partner, so I get hit up with partnerships, and I want to be your partner and sell my tool and this and that. So I know I get drowned in that from a LinkedIn perspective and stuff. I can only imagine you. But how do you kind of look at this and say, well, what's an enterprise technology that's more platform level than these other things that are out there that more are probably place and time, point products and specific like that? How do you work with your team to evaluate?
Yeah, so first and foremost, you have to have a framework, right? So the framework for us, we use the NIST CSF, so the NIST cybersecurity framework. We picked it because I think it speaks very clearly to what we're trying to achieve in our security program: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Those are the things that we ultimately want to build capability around, and that's kind of our guidepost, if you will. So we work internally and with expert third parties to come in and kind of assess our maturity against the framework and determine where we're at from a current state perspective and where we need to go. So that's kind of the guidepost that tells us where we need to make investments, because there is something that we're trying to solve within that CSF spectrum that needs maturity improvement according to our balance of security and business priorities, right? So that's the first piece of it. Secondarily, I have a team that's pretty focused on bringing in the right tools and capabilities to be able to meet that need, right? So it's based on the framework. I have experts in the different categories that are, helping me try to determine what we invest in. And from there, like one of our biggest priorities is we want to create as much of an integrated ecosystem as we possibly can. And I think I say that aspirationally. I think we do a tremendous job inside the company, but there's always more that we could do. And so it's imperative that when we bring in a technology, we implement it to its fullest extent and potential, and then make sure that tool or technology works really well with the other investments that we've made. So that's a big criteria for us, and certainly one that you've seen from us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess let me kind of change the topic a little bit for us. So there's a lot of interest in, obviously we're in pandemic time, right? So I'm seeing you're sitting at your house today versus in the office. So someone in your role, where you're having to really consistently get buy-in from folks, whether it's new initiatives or investments that have been made and so on and so forth. How has this remote work impacted you personally? to be able to have those cadences and have that trusted advisor type of approach to your business, business leaders?
Yeah. So personally, I used to be under this impression where it was absolutely imperative for me to, at a minimum, have my cybersecurity operations together, co-located, and working collaboratively, like in an office setting. Um, yeah, I like to manage my organization on the basis of outcomes, right? So not really when you clock in, clock out, how much are you working? It has nothing to do with that. It's really about outcomes. And I felt that outcomes would be best produced with that co-location. And what I'm finding is that the outcomes that we measure is not actually dropping off. And so I feel like I'm realigning my previous belief system and saying this whole remote thing could work for cybersecurity. In fact, we have been demonstrating it in the past. And so I think that's kind of the biggest thing that the pandemic has opened my eyes to. I think what that does is it allows us to look at a more global talent pool when we think about who we want to bring into the organization and where we plug them in, right? Because I'm no longer creating these constraints around specifically where you are. So I think that's one of them. The other thing that I really think is important is just making sure that everyone's transition to more of a work from home model is as seamless as possible. You are more disconnected, and you do have to rely heavily on your collaboration tools. You have to rely heavily on your ability to continue to engage with associates. That part becomes a little bit harder, because one of the things that I most valued about being in the office and in person and quite frankly traveling was it's those like mini interactions, unscheduled time that you would have, whether it's with an executive or with people on your team or people within the business, where you run into someone in the hallway and you can knock out a 5-minute conversation pretty quickly, talking about something that's important and get answers. That is probably the biggest thing that I miss, and something that I'd love to ultimately see come back. But you have to make up for that with different techniques. So I think for me, it's been doing my best to communicate a bit more frequently with the full organization instead of my directs. So being focused on that, and then just being respectful and understanding of all the situations that people face. I mean, for a lot of people, the transition to work from home is complicated. You got families at home, schools. We'll see what happens with those. People may or may not have kids in daycare, and so you got kids running around, you got different activities happening, and it's complicated to keep that the typical 8-hour focus. And again, that's why I've made it very clear to my team that I measure outcomes, not how much you work. So those are the techniques that I'm looking to make sure we implement.
Absolutely. So in knowing kind of your environment a little bit, obviously, and in the ecosystem that you've built out, in leveraging this, right? So asset management being huge, part of the early stages there. So, obviously there's definitely been some controls you've established and put in place for Nielsen, thank God, around asset management and focusing on a level of visibility and control. But as pandemic hits, and assets are flying out the door left and right, what new risks really have emerged through this pandemic for you that maybe were unseen, or things that you might have known that would come down the pike and you've been able to control a bit more?
Yeah, for us, I wouldn't say that there's new risks per se. I would say that there's an exacerbation of existing risk.
Sure.
We have, our monitoring has picked up a lot more phishing campaigns, and many of those campaigns are crafted to prey on the fact that people want more information about coronavirus and want information. They want metrics. They want to know what to do. And attackers love a good crisis, and so they have taken advantage of that. I mentioned earlier in our discussion that we had this really unique opportunity to build out a progressive security company or organization for Nielsen. And having brought the teams together and established cyber under a CISO, we made some really good and smart, in my opinion, technology investments that were very much cloud first. One of the key tenets of what we wanted to make sure that we did was we know and have known for years that the perimeter is deteriorating. We're going to be in a hybrid cloud world. We're going to leverage SaaS applications a lot more. And we simply cannot rely on traditional perimeter security capabilities to safeguard our organization. So across the spectrum, whether it's secure web gateways, whether it's anti-malware platforms, whether it's you name the control, we deliver that predominantly from the cloud. So I'm still able, when you went home and you took your device home, I'm still able to deliver the security controls that we want to because they're cloud enabled. So that was really big for us. What we had to do was really kind of expand the remote access capability as opposed to inventing new ways of doing it. We've had remote work for a long time, and we really had to scale that up, and it's backed by the security program that we cloud deliver.
Oh, that's excellent. Is there, when you look at the future of work for Nielsen, and you look at kind of the workforce, what role does your team play in some of the measures that are going to move forward, whether it's bringing folks back to the office or if there's a new norm, if you will, for Nielsen, and what does that look like in the conversation tracks that you're having today in preparing that organization for the readiness of that?
Yeah, so we're very actively involved. I'm really impressed with the way Nielsen as an organization addressed the pandemic. Right out of the gates, this was an executive level matter, and I think we got into that very early. We have a large operation in China, and so we were getting very immediate feedback on the ground as it kind of started in China, and that taught us a tremendous amount of lessons. Our team on the ground there did just such an amazing job of dealing with the lockdown and then reestablishing work in the office, and it helped us chart the course for the rest of the world. And we were on a daily, twice daily cadence going through that, and cyber played a very important role in the very beginning because there was so much complexity around how do we make sure that we scale up effectively. We had some contractors that we work with that had their own set of challenges because they traditionally worked in an office, so working in partnership with them to make sure that they could securely access the resources that they need to fulfill their end of the bargain. So we were extremely active in the early days, and ultimately that settled down from a cyber standpoint, and we started really focusing a lot of our efforts on, like I said, the expansion of existing risks, whether it's phishing, attacks against remote access points. I mean, we started being more aggressive about our ability to monitor those in the pandemic world. Now that we're in the process of kind of having a cadence of reopening offices and re-enabling work, we're still playing a role, but it's more of a support role for other parts of our organization, like our HR department, our security department, who focuses on the security of the personnel in our organization. We're playing a support role to enable them with the things that they need to do to bring folks back to the office.
Yeah. So it sounds like you've built it. It sounds great. I mean, you've built a dynamic group, right, with some really strong ecosystem technologies and partners in terms of whether they're implementation partners or consulting partners. And I hear in your talk track a lot about influencing that advisor role to the business. Do you see that the things that you've instilled in driving your organization to the level that they're at today is allowing you to do that, and what does your cadence typically look like in that world as the advisor to the business?
Yeah, for sure. And actually, we're investing more in this concept of being an advisor to the business. I think a lot of our first couple of years really putting this program together, we were very hyper focused on building kind of what I would describe as the back office of cybersecurity. So the cyber operations team kind of fusion center concept that we've implemented, because we really needed to have that detect and respond capability. I think I mean, in breach scenarios, if you don't have that, it's almost worse than the fact that you didn't prevent it in the first place. And so we pretty heavily invested in that side of the world, and now we're not reducing focus on that. We're kind of expanding into what we're calling more the front office of cybersecurity, how we engage and interact with our stakeholder groups, and putting a really clear focus on making sure that when we build products, we do that securely. And we look at that as an organization, we're extremely privacy conscious, or extremely security conscious, and we look at that as a differentiator between us and others, because we focus so heavily on that. And so a lot of our investment over the next couple of years is going to be on making sure that we are a rock solid advisor to our business, and really collaboratively discuss cyber risk, and ultimately together alongside our business leaders and our technology leaders strike that investment balance of what we really need to do, and how is that going to support our overall mission as an organization.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and it sounds, from a top level, that there's a lot that went into that, right? A lot of planning, third party partnerships, even level 1 partnerships, things like that might exist. So kudos to you on building that phenomenal organization. When you look at, I just want to pick your brain on one thing, and then we can kind of close out. But when we look at the world of automation, right, and obviously you've selected some top-notch technologies that are out there. What opportunities do you see that you guys have as you kind of move in, mature through NIST? It sounds like there's a lot of visibility and control out there for you that's allowing you to do some of these advisement types of roles. But what's out there for you in terms of automation when you look at your org and maybe what they're doing in cloud and DevOps and things of that nature? Where do you see some really strong opportunities for you to leverage those technologies, leverage the capabilities and the process you've instilled, and move it forward?
Yeah, so I'm a huge proponent of public cloud. Generally, I think that we can create a far more secure profile for our particular organization adopting public cloud workloads. The reason I say that is because you're asking about automation, and the way I see public cloud being so API driven that you could take what used to be a policy that was on paper, and then I would go beat up Chris and say, hey, why aren't you following this policy, that policy? And we'd have that kind of audit process. In the public cloud, we're doing some really awesome automation that automates the detection or drift from policy compliance, and actually doing auto remediation activities. So I would encourage everybody, if you're not already doing that, you really should be, because it creates this tremendous opportunity to really automate your policies, get better visibility, and free up your team. And there's no shortage of work. Free them up to be more of that business advisor role, or do more implementations of something where you have a gap area. So I would say that's probably the number one opportunity that I look at, and something that I think people want to do, but if you're not doing it, you should be. Then you have to make sure that when you make investments, it's okay to go best of breed, but don't think of them as point solutions. There's real need for these systems to talk to each other. I am envisioning a world where, especially with current SIM licensing models around consumption, that the SIM in the future may not be the end-all be-all single pane of glass that it used to be. And so we've taken an approach that in certain categories we go best of breed, but we want to make sure that those are integrated either with the SIM or something else. And so I think there's automation opportunity above and beyond tool integrations with the SIM that will enable you to leave data where it is and analyze in a normalized fashion across those data sets. So that's one thing that I'm predicting we're going to see from a tooling perspective. I think some vendors are going to pick up on that concept. I think you're already seeing that with IBM and with ReliaQuest. You're seeing some of the activity. But yeah, just a relentless focus on making sure that your tools talk to each other and are working together to provide you better value than you would otherwise get from that single investment.
Absolutely. Well, excellent. Chris, again, I want to thank you so much. We're going to settle one thing. Who's the biggest USF fan on this call right now?
Without a doubt.
There's no way. There's no way.
Well, sure. I'm just hoping that we have a football season. So.
Oh, God, I hope so, bud. I hope so. All right, man. I really appreciate the time today. Thank you for the partnership. Thanks for the friendship, and take care. And thanks again.
Certainly. The last thing I'll leave you with, I think the answer to your question is right here. I've got the USF logo. You've got the Defender logo. I think that's all that can be said.
I have to represent them. All right, man.
All right. Thanks a lot, Chris.
All right, bye. Thank you so much for joining us today on Beyond the Finish Line. I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I did. Please visit us at www.contendersolutions.com/Beyond the Finish Line, where you can find show notes, a link to our guest bio, links to additional sessions, and access to additional social media content related to client success. Thanks for the support, and we'll see you next time on Beyond the Finish Line.